Welcome back. President Trump strengthening ties with Taiwan with a new executive order. The State Department will now review contracts and guidelines for engagement with Taiwan. China has been increasing its aggression against Taiwan in recent weeks. Taiwan boosting its defense spending by $40 billion to counter Beijing's military might, and it's planning to purchase arms and defense technology from the United States. Joining me now, the Gatestone Institute senior fellow Gordon Chang. Gordon, great to see you. Thank you so much for being here. What's your reaction to this move on Taiwan?
Well, this is very good on the part of President Lai in Taiwan. The important point here is that he wants to spend more. He wants to buy U.S. weapons. And that's really important for President Trump, who has been talking about this during the campaign, for instance, about how Taiwan needed to buy more U.S. products, especially weapons. But the problem is that the opposition Kuomintang, KMT, basically controls the legislature. They're the largest party there, and with their coalition partner, they're able to block and water down defense spending. So it's going to be a really important test to see what happens in the legislature.
Well, President Trump is making a lot of very positive moves to push back against the aggression from Communist China. And one of them is partnering and strengthening these ties. But China's foreign minister met with his Russian counterpart in Moscow yesterday to reaffirm their global partnership. This coming just hours after U.S. and Russian officials negotiated for 5 hours at the Kremlin yesterday, coming out of that meeting with no agreement on Ukraine. We're still waiting here, but it's interesting to see these red lines being drawn with China cozying up to Russia, continuing to.
Yes, and it was no coincidence that you have the Chinese foreign minister, Wang Yi, in Moscow at the same time that Witkoff and Kushner were there. And remember, this is the same Wang Yi that in early July told the EU counterpart, Kaja Kallas, that China does not want the war in Ukraine to end. And there, Witkoff and Kushner are trying to end the war. So you can see that Putin is probably being influenced by the Chinese not to do anything to stop the fighting.
Well, it's interesting because China is partnering with Russia at the time that Japan is partnering with the United States. And the U.S. has been able to create many, many more alliances, including Japan, to push back on China as well. Another very important move that President Trump has made.
Yeah, Japan is really important because it has a very capable military. They don't call it that. They call it the Self-Defense Forces. China right now has picked this fight with Japan. Japan has not backed down. And the Chinese right now are hysterical. And I think one of the reasons why Wang Yi was in Moscow was to enlist Russia in its rhetorical fight against Japan.
Yeah, I mean, Beijing also slamming the United Kingdom this morning as the country once again delays a decision for China to build a mega embassy in the heart of London. The UK will now decide January 20th, citing national security concerns. Now, why would they put a gigantic embassy from China in the middle of London, Gordon?
Especially over sensitive cables that run underneath the Royal Mint, which is what China wants to take over. That's 20,000 square meters.
Wow.
No wonder why they call it a mega embassy. And clearly, Britain should not give approval. Most people think that Keir Starmer, the prime minister, will give approval because he's going to Beijing in the early part of next year, and he wants to have this sort of wrapped up.
Okay.
But they should not. They should not give approval for that.
So let's talk about the U.S.'s relations with China right now. A lot of back and forth over the rare earth minerals issue, but now we've got soybean prices declining as China buys up more American products. That's set to extend into next year. China buying an estimated 2 million metric tons of American soybeans in November during the 2025 and 2026 marketing year. American agricultural products now shipping around the world due to the president's recent trade deals. And Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins says China is vowing to stop soybean purchases from Brazil. Watch this.
For so long, our farmers, many of them have been farming for government checks instead of moving their product around the world. These trade deals changed that forever. Just a couple of days ago, China announced that they were going to halt all purchases from Brazil because they had found some irregularities in some of the soybeans they're buying from Brazil. And what that means is a continued signal that this country and our farmers produce the best, highest quality soybeans, sorghum, et cetera, in the world. And what you've been able to do is open those markets up.
So what do you think, Gordon? Are they keeping their promises on soybean purchases?
Well, they're buying more soybeans, but they're not buying enough to meet their commitment of 12 million metric tons by the end of the year. Now, the Treasury Secretary yesterday said, well, China's on track to meet it by February of next year. Well, That's not the commitment.
That
the
wasn't the
commitment is the end of this year. So clearly, well, you got a problem. Also, you know, Bessent actually told you when you interviewed him that there would be a rare earth deal by Thanksgiving. Well, that hasn't happened either. So I think China is playing the Trump administration, and it's time for President Trump to start imposing higher tariffs to say to the Chinese, we're not putting up with this delay.
Yeah, we'll see about that. I mean, I wonder. You're right. Bessent did say that we were going to see a signed contract. We haven't seen that yet. But I also spoke with the Securities and Exchange Commission Chairman Paul Atkins this week. We met on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, and we talked about disclosures. He wants to make it easier for companies to go public. But when talking about disclosures, I asked him about disclosures from Chinese companies that are traded on U.S. exchanges. Watch this. So if a stock is on one of the entity lists in America, should an American investor buy that company?
Well, we have, those sorts of things, you know, the Treasury and the Defense Department and whatnot that put out lists of firms that are under sanctions or whatever. But so those are obviously cases that under law, you know, they're treated differently. I'm talking about other sorts of, you know, foreign private issuers that, again, have a different type of setup where they are incorporated outside of China. Operations are still there or somewhere else, you know, in Asia, and then, you know, their primary listing are here in the U.S.
You know, Gordon, I think we hit on a very, very specific vulnerability here in this whole relationship. I mean, if you've got Chinese companies that are sanctioned already and on Pentagon entity lists, how do you make the case that it's okay for an investor to buy that stock?
Well, you can't. And you asked an important question of the SEC chairman, and the SEC chairman did not give you an answer. Clearly, if a company poses a national security threat to the United States that is so serious that it's on the Commerce Department's entity list, which means no American can deal with it without permission, then of course it shouldn't be traded on American exchanges. Because basically, we're financing companies that we say are a threat to the United States and to the American people. I don't understand how we can permit that.
Yeah, which is why we did an entire series of specials on Fox Nation called Underwriting the Enemy, which is what we're doing. We're underwriting the enemy. But, Gordon, you know, President Trump has said before, look, I don't want to put China out of business. I don't want to destroy China. I'm not going to. And this is a huge piece of business for Wall Street firms. I mean, if you go ahead and take these companies that are Chinese companies off of the exchanges in America, you're removing the deepest, most liquid capital markets in the world for China. And that's going to be a very significant move should President Trump ever do that. And it certainly is going to be a very significant move to take away that business from Wall Street as well.
Well, certainly it is, but we got to remember that these Chinese companies are working and cooperating actively with the Chinese military under this doctrine of military-civil fusion. And so these are companies that are helping to kill Americans. I know it's a difficult issue for Wall Street, but ultimately we can't send men and women into battle and say, oh, by the way, we finance the bullets that are being shot at you.
Right.
It's just absolutely wrong.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, my
wrong.
family has, you know, shares in the company that makes that gun that is pointing at me right now. It's just unbelievable. Gordon, thank you. Great analysis as usual from you. Good to see you.
Thanks, Maria.
Gordon Chang. All right, stay with us. We'll be right back.